Gaslighting at work rarely looks abusive. It looks professional. It doesn't involve shouting, threats, or obvious aggression. It happens quietly, in meetings, emails, and conversations that seem normal on the surface. And that's why it's so hard to recognize. Workplace gaslighting is not about someone disagreeing with you. It's about slowly making you doubt your own perception, your memory, your judgment. Over time, what once felt clear starts to feel confusing. You replay conversations in your head. You wonder if you misunderstood something. You begin questioning decisions you were once confident about. This isn't accidental. And it's not harmless. Gaslighting at work is a form of psychological control. It thrives in environments where hierarchy matters, where authority goes unquestioned, and where people are afraid of being seen as difficult. Many intelligent, capable professionals experience it without realizing what's happening. Not because they're weak, but because they assume the workplace operates on logic, fairness, and shared reality. In this video, we'll break down what workplace gaslighting really is, how it shows up in everyday professional settings, why it works so effectively, and what actually changes the dynamic once you see it clearly. Because awareness doesn't just help you understand the situation. It changes how the situation affects you. Workplace gaslighting is not conflict. And it's not feedback. It's a pattern of communication designed to distort reality. Someone repeatedly questions your version of events, minimizes your concerns, or reframes situations in a way that benefits them, while making you feel uncertain about your own perspective. Unlike direct manipulation, gaslighting is subtle. It often sounds reasonable, professional, even supportive. Phrases like, "That's not what happened," "You're overthinking this," or "I never said that," slowly begin to appear. On their own, these statements don't seem dangerous. But over time, they accumulate. The goal is not to prove you wrong once. The goal is to make you unsure consistently. Workplace gaslighting often hides behind authority. When a manager, senior colleague, or influential team member rewrites reality, their position gives their version more weight. And because work environments value cooperation and adaptability, many people respond by adjusting themselves rather than questioning the narrative. This is what makes gaslighting especially effective at work. You're encouraged to doubt yourself, not the system. It's important to understand that gaslighting is not always intentional in a conscious way. But it is always functional. It protects power. It maintains control. And it shifts responsibility away from the person creating confusion. Once you understand that gaslighting is about control, not miscommunication, the pattern becomes much easier to recognize. Workplace gaslighting rarely appears as a single moment. It shows up as a pattern. Small, repeated experiences that slowly shift how you see yourself and your work. One common form is when expectations keep changing, but responsibility never does. You're told one thing, then later criticized for not doing something else. When you point out the inconsistency, the response sounds calm and reasonable. "That's not what I meant. You should have known. We discussed this already." Over time, you stop trusting your own memory of what was agreed upon. Another form shows up in conversations that subtly undermine your confidence. Your ideas are questioned repeatedly, but never directly dismissed. Feedback stays vague. Praise is inconsistent. And clarity is always just out of reach. When you ask for specifics, the answer feels circular. Nothing is clearly wrong, but nothing is clearly right either. Gaslighting also appears when past events are rewritten. A conversation you clearly remember is described differently later. Decisions you were part of suddenly become decisions you're blamed for. When you express concern, the response shifts the focus back onto you. "You're being too sensitive. You're overthinking this. You're taking it personally." The message is subtle but consistent. The problem isn't the situation. It's your perception of it. In meetings, gaslighting can look like being interrupted, spoken over, or corrected unnecessarily. Your contributions are reframed by someone else, or credited in a way that minimizes your role. None of these moments seem dramatic on their own, but together, they create confusion. And confusion is what makes gaslighting effective. When reality feels unstable, people look for external validation. And that's when control quietly shifts away from them. Workplace gaslighting works because it exploits how people naturally respond to authority, uncertainty, and risk. Most work environments are hierarchical. Decisions flow downward. And authority is often treated as truth. When someone higher in the hierarchy questions your perception, your brain doesn't evaluate it neutrally. It immediately scans for danger. What if they're right? What if I'm misunderstanding something? What if pushing back costs me something? Gaslighting activates self-preservation. And self-preservation makes people cautious, compliant, and self-doubting. Another reason gaslighting works is because workplaces reward adaptability. Being easy to work with is often valued more than being accurate. So when reality becomes unclear, many people choose to adjust themselves instead of challenging the narrative. Not because they agree with it, but because resistance feels risky. Gaslighting also thrives on ambiguity. Clear environments leave little room for manipulation. But vague expectations, shifting priorities, and undefined success metrics create space for control. When rules aren't fixed, power belongs to the person who defines them in the moment. Over time, this dynamic conditions people to second-guess themselves before they speak. They rehearse conversations internally. They soften their language. They preemptively apologize. This is not weakness. It's a learned response to uncertainty combined with authority. Gaslighting works because it doesn't force compliance. It invites it. The more confused you feel, the more you look outward for clarity. And the person controlling the narrative becomes the reference point for reality. That's the core mechanism. Control doesn't come from aggression. It comes from being the one others rely on to define what's real. The impact of workplace gaslighting doesn't appear all at once. It accumulates quietly, over time. One of the first effects is confusion. Not dramatic confusion, but a low-level mental noise. You start replaying conversations in your head. You question whether you expressed yourself clearly enough. You wonder if you missed something obvious. Gradually, confidence erodes. Not because you suddenly became less capable, but because your internal reference point keeps getting challenged. Decisions that once felt natural now require reassurance. You hesitate before speaking. You soften statements that don't need softening. Over time, this affects performance. Not intelligence. Performance. Energy shifts from doing the work to managing uncertainty. Mental effort goes into staying safe instead of being effective. Another common effect is emotional exhaustion. Not from workload, but from constant self-monitoring. You become hyper-aware of tone, of timing, of how things might be interpreted. This internal vigilance is costly. It narrows focus. It reduces creativity. And it increases stress, even in environments that don't look overtly hostile. Many people blame themselves for these changes. They assume they've become weaker, less resilient, or less motivated. But these reactions are not personal failures. They're predictable responses to prolonged ambiguity combined with authority. Gaslighting doesn't break people. It wears them down. Over time, people adapt to this state without realizing it. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel normal. You lower expectations. You stop questioning things that don't make sense. You focus on avoiding mistakes instead of doing your best work. This is how gaslighting reshapes behavior. Not through fear, but through quiet adjustment. And because the change is gradual, Many people don't notice how much it has affected them until they step out of the environment. And understanding this is important, because once you recognize the impact, you can stop interpreting it as something that's wrong with you. What changes the dynamic of workplace gaslighting is not confrontation. And it's not proving someone wrong. Gaslighting doesn't survive clarity. The first shift happens internally. When you stop treating confusion as a personal failure and start seeing it as a pattern, awareness changes how you interpret interactions in real time. Comments that once felt disorienting become recognizable. Shifting expectations stop feeling random. This doesn't mean you argue more. It means you observe more. Documentation becomes grounding. Writing things down. Clarifying agreements. Following up in neutral language. Not to accuse, but to anchor reality. Another important shift is internal alignment. You stop over-explaining. You stop preemptively apologizing. You allow silence without rushing to fill it. Gaslighting feeds on reaction. When reactions soften, the mechanism weakens. This isn't about becoming cold or defensive. It's about becoming steady. Some dynamics change once clarity is present. Others don't. And that information matters, because it tells you whether the environment is capable of change, or whether clarity simply reveals its limits. Many people leave conversations like these thinking they need to be stronger, more confident, or more resilient. But clarity isn't about toughness. It's about accuracy. When you understand what's happening, you stop wasting energy trying to fix yourself. And that's often the moment when you start making decisions that actually protect your long-term well-being. The goal isn't to win. It's to see clearly enough to choose your next move consciously.